All right, let's dive deep today into, well, the landscape of your own mind. You ever feel like there's this voice just kind of narrating your life, like offering up commentary on everything you do?
Yeah, that mental chatter we all deal with, that inner monologue that can sometimes feel like a whole separate being almost.
And that's exactly what we're going to unpack today. We're looking at a really fascinating excerpt from this YouTube channel, Psychotic. Their video is titled, "Your Mental Chat is Actually Not You." And what's so interesting is, it really challenges us to think, is this mental chatter really us? Or is it something else entirely?
Yeah, it kind of throws a curveball.
Yeah.
Suggesting that we're not this singular self, but more like a collection of all these voices and thoughts and experiences.
This video does such a great job of painting this picture of the voice. They describe it as this constant dialogue, this background noise, even an echo, a construction, a reflection. You know that voice, right?
Yeah.
The one that's like, get up, or why'd you say that yesterday? Or maybe it's the one that just loves to remind you of every mistake you've ever made.
It's so interesting how they frame this mental chatter as like its own entity, something totally distinct from like our core being. And, there's actually a good bit of research backing this up.
Now, that's what I call a deep dive. Tell me more about this.
Well, neuroscientists, they found that certain areas of the brain actually light up when we experience this internal dialogue.
Yeah.
So it suggests that this mental chatter isn't just some vague concept. It's a real measurable thing with like its own neural pathways and everything.
So it's like our brains are hardwired for this internal conversation.
Seems that way, yeah. But the real question then is, who's having the conversation? If it's not our true selves, then like who or what is it?
The video calls this other part of us the silent witness, the part that's kind of aware of the chatter, but not necessarily consumed by it all.
Right, exactly. Think of it like this. You're sitting in a room and there's like a radio playing in the background. You can hear the music, the news, the ads, but you don't have to sing along or get caught up in every word. You can just observe it, acknowledge it's there, and choose whether or not you want to actually engage with it.
Okay, so I think I'm starting to see the difference here. So the mental chatter, that's like the radio. It's just constantly broadcast. But the silent witness, that's us. We're the listener. And we get to choose how we want to interact.
Exactly. And that's what's so powerful about this realization. It gives us agency. We have a choice in how we respond to this internal dialogue. We don't have to be at its mercy.
It makes me think of the story they shared in the video about this woman named Anna. She was really struggling with some serious negative self-talk and felt totally trapped by it for years.
Yes. Her story is such a great example of this observer concept. Sometimes people use that interchangeably with silent witness.
Oh, can you explain the difference? I have to admit, I kind of get those two mixed up sometimes.
Yeah, they are very closely related. But there's a subtle difference. The silent witness is like our pure awareness, just noticing the mental chatter without any judgment. But the observer, they take a more active role, not just witnessing, but analyzing, understanding, and even questioning the thoughts as they come up.
So in Anna's case, she learned to be the observer, right? She didn't just passively listen to all that negative self-talk. She actually started digging into where those thoughts were coming from and why they were so persistent.
Yeah, spot on. Instead of getting all wrapped up in identifying with those negative thoughts, she started to see them as separate from her true self.
Yeah.
And that was a huge turning point for her.
I think this is where things start to get really practical for everyone listening. How do we learn to be more like Anna?
Well, the video has this simple but powerful exercise. The next time you get hit with a negative thought, just pause for a second. Observe it without judging it. And just ask yourself, where is this coming from? Is this like a pattern, a fear, an old belief?
It's like almost turning the tables on that inner critic, right? Instead of letting it control the whole conversation, you step back and you examine it with this curious mind.
Exactly. But just observing and questioning those thoughts, you create space between yourself and the thought, and that weakens its grip, and you start reclaiming your power.
Okay, this is kind of blowing my mind here. So if that mental chatter isn't me, then who am I? And what does all this have to do with my everyday life anyway?
Those are really great questions. And to answer them, let's kind of shift gears a bit. The video uses this other metaphor. They talk about the mental chatter as being like the narrator in a book. Now, the narrator, they can tell your story in a lot of different ways. They could focus on your flaws, your mistakes, your fears, but
we're the authors. We have the power to choose how we respond to that narrative and ultimately shape the direction our stories go in.
That's it. And that's how this whole concept plays out in our everyday lives. By understanding that we're not our mental chatter, we can actually start to challenge those negative narratives, reframe our experiences, and make choices that line up with what we value and what we want in life.
This is giving me a lot to think about already. We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive.
We really have. And this is honestly just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to explore and unpack when it comes to understanding this mental chatter and how it impacts our lives.
So if you're as fascinated by this as I am, stick with us for part 2 of this episode. We're going to dive even deeper into this world of the mind.
It's interesting, how this whole idea of mental chatter, it's not just some new age thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's got some serious history, right?
Totally. Ancient philosophers and all these spiritual traditions, they've been exploring this for centuries. Like the Buddhists, they have this concept of the monkey mind, describing how our thoughts can be so restless and kind of chaotic.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that. But I never really connected it to this whole mental chatter thing.
Well, they're totally aligned. And, even in modern psychology, you've got things like cognitive distortions and automatic negative thoughts, which are basically just different ways of talking about this mental chatter and how it can mess with our perceptions.
So it's we've always kind of known on some level that our minds can really play tricks on us, right?
Absolutely. And I think the video we're talking about today, it just brings it all together in this really compelling way.
It definitely makes you stop and think about all those thoughts bouncing around up there.
Speaking of which, they go on to talk about how this mental chatter can actually warp how we see reality.
Okay, now that's got my attention. What do you mean by that?
Okay, so imagine this. You're walking down the street, you trip, and you fall. Now, the event itself is just that, you trip. But then your mental chatter might jump in and start creating this whole story around it.
Oh my God, I'm such a klutz. Everyone saw me. This is so embarrassing.
Exactly. And suddenly, it's not just a simple stumble. It's this big narrative about how you're inadequate or something.
And that whole narrative, it can really impact how we feel about ourselves and the situation.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where it gets even more interesting. The video talks about the work of Dr. Daniel Amen. He's this really renowned psychiatrist, and he uses brain imaging to study the effects of negative thoughts.
So actual physical changes in the brain.
Yeah, for real. His research shows that when we're constantly engaged in that negative self-talk, it actually increases activity in the amygdala, which is the part of the brain that's all about fear and anxiety.
Wow. So our thoughts can literally set off a stress response in our bodies.
Exactly. And over time, that chronic stress can really take a toll on our physical and mental health.
Okay, this is powerful stuff. But, I mean, if we're not careful, it can start to sound kind of doom and gloom.
Right. That's a good point. The key takeaway here isn't to make us afraid of our own thoughts. It's to empower us to really understand them and learn how to manage them better.
So it's not about silencing the voice altogether. It's more about changing how we relate.
Yeah, exactly. The video uses this really helpful analogy. They compare our mental chatter to a wild horse.
Yeah.
If we try to fight it directly, we're probably going to get thrown off. But if we learn to understand it, work with its energy, we can actually ride it and even, guide it in the direction we want to go.
Okay, I love that. So it's about figuring out how to coexist with this mental chatter, make it work for us instead of against us.
That's the goal. And they actually go on to share some really practical techniques for doing just that.
Now you're speaking our language. Our listeners are going to want to know about this.
Well, one of the techniques they talk about is called thought labeling. It's this mindfulness practice where you simply observe a thought and you give it a label, like worry, judgment, or planning.
So instead of getting all caught up in the content of the thought, you're just acknowledging it's there and kind of categorized.
Yep. That's it. And the interesting thing is, studies have shown that this simple act of labeling, it can actually reduce how intense negative thoughts are and how long they stick around.
So it's taking away some of their power by recognizing that they're just thought, not necessarily fact.
Exactly. Another technique they mention is called cognitive reframing. And that involves, challenging negative thoughts by trying to find alternative explanation or different ways to interpret things.
So for instance, instead of thinking, ugh, I'm such a failure because I didn't get that promotion, you might ask yourself, okay, what can I learn from this experience? What steps can I take to, up my chances next time?
Exactly. It's about shifting from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset, seeing challenges as opportunities to learn and grow.
That reminds me of that quote by Epictetus, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters.
Such a perfect example. And, it all comes back to this core idea of the observer. By developing that ability to observe our thoughts, we're creating this space for choice. We're not just at the mercy of our mental chatter anymore. We become the, conscious creators of our own experience.
Okay, so we've been talking a lot about techniques and strategies, but what about the bigger picture? What's the end goal of all this work with mental chatter?
I think the video touches on something really profound here. It suggests that by understanding and mastering this mental chatter, we can actually tap into a deeper level of awareness, this sense of peace and stillness that exists beyond all the, ups and downs of the mind.
Okay, now we're getting a bit philosophical. You're talking about finding inner peace in the middle of all the chaos.
Exactly. And this isn't just some fluffy feel-good concept. There's a growing body of research out there that actually supports the benefits of mindfulness and meditation practices, which are really all about training your mind to be more present, more aware, and less reactive to that mental chatter.
So it's like rewiring our brains for, calmness and clarity.
That's a great way to put it. And, the really cool thing is that these practices are available to anyone. You don't have to be, a monk or a meditation guru to benefit from them.
This is all starting to sound very empowering. It's like we have this incredible tool inside us, this ability to observe our own mind. And we're only just beginning to tap into its potential.
Absolutely. And the video actually leaves us with this really thought-provoking question.
Okay, I'm all ears. What is it? Okay, come on. Don't leave us hanging. What's the question?
Well, the video asks, if that voice isn't you, then who are you really?
Whoa, that's a big one. Really makes you rethink everything we've been talking about.
It does, doesn't it? It's we've got to go beyond just managing the chatter, and start to really dig into this whole self-awareness.
So we've been working on taming the wild horse, but now we're asking, who's the rider?
Exactly. And, the video doesn't really give us a straight answer.
Which is probably a good thing, right? It's got to be more about the journey of figuring yourself out, not just reaching some final destination.
I think so, yeah. And there's a whole field of study dedicated to this kind of exploration. It's called contemplative neuroscience.
Oh, now that sounds interesting. What's that all?
Well, it combines those traditional wisdom practices like meditation with all the modern brain imaging technology.
So they're actually looking at what's going on in the brain or do other contemplative practices.
That's right. And what they're finding is, pretty amazing. It turns out these practices can actually lead to real structural changes in the brain.
Wow. So not just temporary mood boosts. We're talking actual rewiring of the brain.
You got it.
Yeah.
For example, they've found that people who've been meditating for a long time, they actually have more gray matter in the areas of the brain that deal with things like attention, emotional regulation, and, self-awareness.
So it's we can literally train our brains to be calmer, more focused, more resilient.
That's the exciting part. And, it's still early days for this research, but it's opening up this whole new way of understanding the mind and what it can do.
I gotta say, this whole deep dive has been a real eye-opener for me. I'm seeing my own mental chatter in a completely different way now.
I'm glad to hear that. And remember, this is really just the start, the journey of self-discovery. It's like a lifelong adventure.
Yeah, and this episode has given me a great map, and some amazing tools to help me navigate it all.
We're so happy to have been a part of it. And, the video we looked at today, it's just one perspective on this huge, fascinating topic.
So there's even more to explore out there.
Oh, tons. There are so many books, articles, podcasts, all dedicated to understanding the mind and, how to cultivate self-awareness.
Well, to everyone listening, if you're as intrigued by all of this as we are, we really encourage you to, keep diving deeper, keep exploring different ideas, keep asking those big questions.
Like, if that voice isn't you, then who are you really?
It's a question that might not have just one simple answer, but, just trying to figure it out can lead to some really profound discoveries and transformations.
Yeah, and who knows, maybe that's the whole point, to go on this journey of self-discovery that never really ends.
Well said. On that note, we'll leave you all to ponder that thought. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the amazing world of your own mind. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.